On Christmas morning, my dad smiled and handed my uncle an envelope, saying, "We've been keeping this a secret for years." The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday. I still remember the weight of that envelope in my hands, how my fingers trembled as I slid my thumb under the seal, how the Stanford logo gleamed crimson against the white paper. I remember the exact moment I read the words, "Pleased to inform you," and how I screamed so loud that Mrs. Peterson next door called to make sure everything was all right.
Mom.
"Dad," I had shouted, running through our modest two-story home. Letter clutched to my chest like it might fly away. I got in. I actually got in. My parents had exchanged glances before breaking into smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Dad hugged me tightly, lifting me off the ground like he used to when I was little. "That's my girl," he'd said, his voice thick. "Always knew you could do it." Mom had wiped at her eyes, blaming allergies, and promised we'd celebrate that weekend. I didn't notice then how they changed the subject when I asked about dormitory options. I was too busy floating on cloud nine, texting friends, and imagining myself walking beneath California palm trees, my future stretching bright and limitless before me. Stanford had been my dream since 5th grade when Ms. Wilson gave our class a project on colleges. Most kids picked the state university or wherever their parents had gone. But I stumbled across Stanford's website with its pictures of sandstone buildings and stories of innovation, and something clicked. I knew this was where I belonged. "If you work hard enough, Ellie, you can get there," Dad had promised that night as he tucked me in, my Stanford poster already hanging above my bed. "Your mom and I have been putting money away for you since you were born. Your college fund will be ready when you are." Those words became my mantra through middle school debates, high school AP classes, and endless SAT prep. Through volunteering weekends and summers spent researching instead of hanging out at the mall. Through all the times my friends called me boring or obsessed. I had a dream, and more importantly, I had parents who believed in it, who had planned for it. Until 2 weeks after that acceptance letter arrived. I came home from school to find Mom and Dad sitting at the kitchen table, faces grave. Papers were spread between them. Dad's reading glasses sat low on his nose, and Mom's coffee had gone cold. "Ellie," Dad said, his voice strangely formal, "we need to talk about college." I remember feeling a flutter of excitement. We were finally going to discuss the details, maybe even plan a campus visit. "Your college fund," Mom started, then looked at Dad. "There was an investment that went wrong," Dad continued, clearing his throat. "The market crashed. The fund is gone, Ellie." "I'm so sorry." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I laughed nervously. "What do you mean, gone? Like, we need to wait for the market to recover or something?" Mom reached for my hand.
No, sweetheart.
"It's gone. All of it." The kitchen seemed to tilt sideways. The Stanford letter, now pinned proudly to our refrigerator, suddenly felt like it was mocking me. But you promised," I whispered, hating how childish the words sounded. "Since I was 10, you said it would be there." Dad removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We tried, honey. God knows we tried. But some things are out of our control." I learned that day that dreams can evaporate in an instant, that promises, even those made with the best intentions, can be broken, and that the future I had mapped out with such certainty was nothing more than a castle built on sand. The following weeks passed in a blur. I called Stanford to defer my acceptance, only to learn that without significant financial aid, which I hadn't applied for, believing I wouldn't need it, deferment wouldn't help. I'd have to reapply the following year, with no guarantee of acceptance. I smiled through graduation, clutching my diploma while classmates talked excitedly about their college plans. I nodded when people congratulated me on Stanford, not having the heart to correct them. And at night, I buried my face in my pillow so my parents wouldn't hear me cry. Community college wasn't what I dreamed of. The classrooms were fluorescent lit and functional, nothing like the hallowed halls I had imagined. I scheduled classes around my shifts at the coffee shop and the bookstore, sometimes rushing from one job to the next with barely time to change uniforms. My textbooks were secondhand, highlighted by previous students, their dreams and struggles anonymous, but somehow familiar. "You'll transfer after 2 years," Mom reassured me, her smile tight with guilt. "And you're saving so much money this way." But it wasn't about the money. It was about the broken promise, the shattered dream. The way my parents now avoided talking about college around me, as if Stanford had become a forbidden word in our house. The worst part wasn't even the community college classrooms or the exhaustion from working 2 jobs. It was the family gatherings, watching my cousins return home from their prestigious universities during breaks, listening to them complain about finals week or dormitory food or which fraternity party had been the most epic. "How's school going, Ellie?" Aunt Sarah would ask, her tone dripping with pity. "It's fine," I'd answer, the lie bitter on my tongue. Really practical, actually. And then Uncle Robert, Dad's brother and business partner, would change the subject, asking about the coffee shop or commenting on the weather, never acknowledging that his daughter was at NYU while I served lattes to hungover students from the state university. I learned to swallow my pride along with the hurt. I buried myself in work and study, determined to excel despite the circumstances. And I never, ever mentioned Stanford again. For years, I carried the weight of that abandoned dream like a stone in my pocket, always there, its edges growing smoother with time but never disappearing completely. I told myself it was just bad luck, just the way life goes sometimes. I almost convinced myself to believe it. Almost. Time has a funny way of healing wounds, or at least scabbing them over enough that you can pretend they don't hurt anymore. For years after the Stanford letter, I had settled into a rhythm that almost felt like acceptance. Wake up, go to class, work shift 1, study break, work shift 2, collapse into bed. Repeat. The community college associate's degree had led to night classes at State, where I was slowly, painfully slowly, working toward a business degree. "You're doing it the responsible way," Mom would say whenever she caught me staring a little too long at a Stanford bumper sticker or newsletter. No student debt. Real-world experience. Employers love that. But I saw the Stanford graduates getting recruited for management positions while I restocked shelves. I watched them walk into interviews with confidence that came from knowing the world expected them to succeed. Meanwhile, I was just trying to stay awake through my evening classes after 8-hour shifts. The resentment grew like a slow-spreading vine, wrapping itself around mundane moments. When Dad and Uncle Robert talked business at family dinners. When Aunt Sarah posted about visiting my cousin Jessica at NYU. When I calculated how many more semesters it would take at my current pace to finally graduate. The family hardware store, Wilson Brothers Hardware, established by my grandfather, had weathered the recession better than most small businesses. At least, that's what everyone said. Dad and Uncle Robert were pillars of the community, sponsoring Little League teams and donating to the high school's fundraisers. They closed every Sunday for Family Day and gave their employees paid time off for Christmas, practically unheard of for a small retailer. "Your father works so hard," neighbors would tell me when I rang up their purchases at the bookstore. "You must be so proud of the family business." I'd smile tightly and say yes, of course I was proud. What else could I say? That sometimes I looked at the store and saw only what it had cost me? Christmas was always the hardest time. The Wilsons went all in on Christmas, with traditions stretching back generations. The tree had to be cut from the same farm. The ornaments came out in a specific order. The stockings were hung with military precision. And the family gathered at my grandparents' house for a celebration that pretended everything was perfect. "Jessica's getting an internship at a publishing house next semester," Aunt Sarah announced during dessert one Christmas Eve, 3 years after my Stanford rejection. "They almost never take sophomores, but her professor recommended her." "That's wonderful," Mom said, passing the pie. "Ellie just got promoted to shift manager at the bookstore. Health benefits and everything." The comparison hung in the air like stale perfume. Jessica caught my eye from across the table, her expression a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment. I focused on my pie, counting the minutes until I could politely escape. Later, I found Jessica on the porch, smoking a cigarette she'd clearly stolen from Grandpa's hidden pack. "Want one?" she offered, holding out the pack. I hesitated, then took one. I didn't smoke, but at that moment, rebellion seemed appropriate. "Sorry about Mom," Jessica said, lighting my cigarette. "She doesn't mean to be such a—" "It's fine," I interrupted, coughing slightly. "I'm actually doing okay, you know. It's not glamorous, but it's a path." Jessica studied me, her eyes, so like Uncle Robert's, narrowing slightly. "Can I ask you something? Why didn't you go to Stanford? I remember when you got in. Everyone was so proud. Then suddenly you were staying here, and nobody ever explained why." The cigarette burned between my fingers, forgotten. "The money wasn't there," I said finally. "The college fund. Bad investment." Jessica frowned. "That's weird, because I remember Dad saying something different when I got into NYU. Something about how they'd learned their lesson after what happened with your family." "What does that mean?" I asked, suddenly alert. Jessica shrugged. "I don't know." He clammed up when he realized I was listening. But it always seemed strange that Uncle Tom and Dad were doing so well with the store right when the economy was at its worst. A cold feeling settled in my stomach, one that had nothing to do with Grandma's peppermint pie. When was this? Right before I left for college. So what, 3 years ago? Jessica took a long drag. "Probably nothing. You know how Dad gets dramatic about business stuff." But it wasn't nothing. Not to me. It was the first crack in the story I'd been told. The first hint that maybe, just maybe, there was more to the tale of my vanished college fund than a simple market down. I didn't confront Dad or Uncle Robert. What would I say? That their daughter had overheard a cryptic comment? That I had suspicions but no proof? Instead, I added it to the growing pile of resentment I carried, another coal for the fire that burned quietly inside me. The summer Jessica graduated from NYU, I took a week off to help Mom with the party preparations. Jessica had already lined up a job at a magazine in New York. She was staying in the city, where she shared an apartment with 2 friends in a trendy neighborhood. "We're so lucky," Aunt Sarah gushed as we set up folding tables in my parents' backyard. "The housing market in New York is brutal, but Robert had some connections through a college friend." "That's great," I said, focusing on straightening the tablecloth. "Of course. We started the girls' college funds early," she continued, oblivious to my discomfort. "Robert always said that was the smartest thing he and Tom did, setting up those accounts before the kids were even walking." I froze, a plastic fork clutched in my hand. "Is that so?" "Oh, yes." After seeing what a struggle it was for Tom's parents to put him through school, the boys vowed their kids would have it easier. She arranged napkins with geometric precision. "Though I suppose things worked out for the best with you. College isn't for everyone, you know." I excused myself before I could say something I'd regret. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. 26 years old, still living in my hometown, still working retail, still trying to finish a degree I'd started years ago. For the first time, I allowed myself to articulate the question that had been lurking in the shadows of my mind. What if there had never been a bad investment? What if the college fund had gone somewhere else? The thought was treacherous, disloyal to the parents who had raised me. And yet, once formed, it refused to dissolve. Christmas morning, 8 years after the Stanford letter. I woke to the smell of Mom's cinnamon rolls and Dad's coffee brewing downstairs, the same sense that had defined Christmas throughout my childhood. Some traditions never changed, even when everything else did. I'd moved into my own apartment the previous spring, a tiny one-bedroom above the florist shop downtown. Not exactly the Silicon Valley starter home I'd once imagined, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. I'd finally completed my business degree through night school the previous May. The ceremony had been on a Tuesday evening, most of the graduates already in their 30s or older, children watching as their parents accepted diplomas. Dad had taken photos. Mom had cried. It should have felt like an accomplishment. Instead, it felt like a consolation prize. I showered and dressed in the guest bathroom, pulling on the Christmas sweater Mom had given me the night before. Family tradition demanded we wear new pajamas on Christmas Eve and new sweaters on Christmas morning. This one was emerald green with silver threads woven through it, actually pretty nice. I brushed my hair into a ponytail and applied minimal makeup, studying my reflection. 28 years old. Not where I thought I'd be, but not unhappy either. Just resigned. Downstairs, the living room glowed with multicolored lights from the tree. Mom was setting the dining table with a special Christmas china, humming carols under her breath. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," she called, spotting me on the stairs. "You look lovely. The green brings out your eyes." "Thanks, Mom." I kissed her cheek, inhaling her familiar perfume. "Need any help?"
No.
"Your father's fetching the orange juice. Sit down, relax." But something in her voice made me pause. A tightness, an undercurrent of anxiety. I studied her face, noticing the way she avoided my gaze, the slight tremble in her hands as she arranged silverware. "Is everything okay?" I asked, helping her with a napkin that had fallen to the floor. "Of course. It's Christmas." Her smile was too bright, too quick. Why wouldn't everything be okay? Before I could press further, Dad emerged from the kitchen, a pitcher of orange juice in one hand and his phone in the other. "Robert says they're running about 15 minutes late," he announced, glancing at Mom. "Sarah can't find the present for Mom, apparently." He looked different somehow. Not physically. Same salt and pepper hair, same reading glasses perched on his nose, same slight paunch from too many business lunches. But there was something in his expression I couldn't quite identify. A mixture of dread? Resolution? "Everything okay, Dad?" I echoed my question to Mom. He started, as if he'd momentarily forgotten I was there.
What? Oh, yes.
"Fine. Just thinking about the day ahead." He set the pitcher down, then asked abruptly, "Are you happy, Ellie?" The question caught me off guard. Happy? Right now?
Sure.
It's Christmas. No, I mean in general. With your life. Your job, your apartment. Are you content? Warning bells rang in my head. Parents don't ask existential questions on Christmas morning unless something's wrong. "Dad, what's going on? Are you sick? Is Mom sick?" He waved away my concern. No, nothing like that. Just thinking about things lately. How life turns out versus how we plan it. He adjusted his glasses, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choices. The doorbell rang before I could respond, saving us both from a conversation neither seemed prepared for. Dad practically leapt to answer it, leaving me standing by the dining table, unsettled and confused. Uncle Robert, Aunt Sarah, Jessica, and her younger brother Michael burst in with the typical Christmas morning chaos, presents being added to the pile, coats being hung, cheeks being kissed. Jessica hugged me tightly, whispering, "Save me from Mom's questions about my dating life," in my ear, making me laugh despite my unease. Breakfast was a noisy affair, with multiple conversations happening at once. I watched them all, these familiar faces that comprised my family, and felt oddly detached, as if viewing them through a slightly fogged window. Something was off. The atmosphere crackled with an unidentifiable tension. Mom kept darting glances at Dad. Dad kept looking at Uncle Robert, who seemed unusually subdued. Aunt Sarah chattered too brightly, filling silences that wouldn't normally need filling. Only Jessica seemed to notice, catching my eye across the table with a raised eyebrow. "What's up with them?" her expression asked. I shrugged slightly. No idea. After breakfast came the present opening, another choreographed ritual of the Wilson family Christmas. Youngest to oldest, one gift at a time, with appropriate oohs and ahs for each reveal. Michael got new wireless headphones. Jessica received a cashmere sweater. I opened a gift card to a bookstore, fitting, if unimaginative. The adults exchanged the usual, ties, scarves, cologne, kitchen gadgets. Throughout it all, the strange tension persisted. Dad barely looked at his new tie from Aunt Sarah, thanking her distractedly. Uncle Robert's laugh sounded forced when he opened the golf balls from Mom and Dad. Mom's hands shook slightly as she unwrapped her new scarf. Last presents, Dad announced when the pile had dwindled. Traditionally, this meant the special gifts from spouses to each other, the jewelry, the watch, the special something saved for last. But instead of reaching for the small box I'd seen him hide behind the tree for Mom, Dad stood up and walked his coat hanging by the door. From the inside pocket, he withdrew an envelope, plain, white, unadorned. The room fell silent. Dad returned to his seat, the envelope clutched in his hand. He looked at Uncle Robert, a long look that seemed to carry an entire conversation in its depths. Uncle Robert nodded almost imperceptibly. "Robert," Dad said, his voice strangely formal, "this is for you. From me. From all of us, really." He extended the envelope. Uncle Robert reached for it, his expression unreadable. "We've been keeping this a secret for years," Dad added, the words hanging in the air like smoke. And then, most shocking of all, he turned to me. "It's time we tell her the truth." 5 simple words, yet they hit me with physical force. My stomach dropped. The room seemed to tilt sideways, a nauseating echo of that day in the kitchen 8 years ago, when dreams of Stanford had shattered against harsh reality. Tell her the truth. About what? The investment that wasn't? The college fund that vanished? The years of working 2 jobs while cousins enjoyed university life? Uncle Robert hadn't opened the envelope. He held it between his fingers, looking at it as if it might bite him. Aunt Sarah had gone very still, her smile frozen on her face. Mom was staring at her hands, twisted in her lap. Jessica broke the silence. "What's going on?" Dad ignored her, his eyes still on me. "Ellie, there's something we need to tell you. Something we should have told you 8 years ago." "What's in the envelope?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Open it, Robert," Dad instructed. Uncle Robert hesitated, then carefully tore the seal. He withdrew what looked like bank statements, legal documents. His expression darkened as he scanned the first page. "Tom, are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "It's time," Dad replied. "We've waited too long already." The room seemed to hold its breath as Dad held the envelope out to me. "The truth about your college fund. About why you couldn't go to Stanford. About the secret your uncle and I have kept all these years." I don't remember taking the envelope from Dad's hand, but suddenly it was in mine, lighter than I expected for something that supposedly contained the truth of 8 years of deception. The room had gone impossibly quiet. Even the usual Christmas morning sounds seemed muffled, as if the world itself was holding its breath. With fingers that didn't feel like my own, I opened the envelope and withdrew its contents. Bank statements. Legal documents with official seals and signatures. And beneath them, a handwritten letter on the hardware store's letterhead, signed by both Dad and Uncle Robert. I looked at Dad, a silent question in my eyes. "Read it," he said softly. "Please." The letter was dated 2 weeks before I received my Stanford acceptance. 2 weeks before my future changed forever. I unfolded it with care, as if it might crumble in my hands, and began to read. "Dear Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means we've finally found the courage to tell you the truth. A truth we should have shared 8 years ago, when you first needed to hear it. But courage failed us then, and we chose deception instead. That choice has haunted us every day since. The college fund we promised you, the one we told you about since you were 10 years old, didn't disappear because of a bad investment or market crash. There was no investment. By the time you received your Stanford acceptance, the fund was already gone. We used it to save the store. In 2014, Wilson Brothers Hardware was on the verge of bankruptcy. The recession had hit us harder than we let anyone know. We were 3 months behind on our business loan payments. Suppliers were threatening to cut us off. We had mortgaged everything we could, maxed out credit cards, borrowed from friends. Nothing was enough. The only untouched money was your college fund, $120,000 we had dutifully saved since your birth, meant to give you the future you dreamed of. We told ourselves we would only borrow from it temporarily, just enough to keep the store afloat until business improved. We would pay it back with interest before you needed it. But the economy recovered slower than we anticipated. The store stabilized, but profits were minimal. When your Stanford acceptance came, we realized with horror that we couldn't replace what we had taken. Not in time, not even close. We considered telling you then. We should have told you then. But seeing your joy, your excitement, we couldn't bear to be the ones to destroy it. So we created the story of the failed investment, the market crash, the unavoidable bad luck that no one could have prevented. It was a lie, a deliberate, calculated lie told by the people who should have protected your dreams at all costs. For 8 years, we've watched you work those double shifts. We've seen the light in your eyes dim when family conversations turn to college. We've witnessed your struggle to build a life different from the one you planned, all while believing it was simply fate that robbed you of Stanford. It wasn't fate. It was us, your father and your uncle, the men who were supposed to keep their promises to you. I read the letter twice, the words blurring through tears I refused to let fall. Beneath it was a check, a number so large it seemed unreal, made out in my name. And under that, bank statements showing transfers from an account labeled Eleanor Wilson College to Wilson Brothers Hardware 8 years ago.
Proof.
Undeniable proof of a betrayal so complete it took my breath away. I looked up to find every eye in the room on me. Dad's face was ashen, his shoulders slumped as if a great weight pressed upon them. Uncle Robert stared at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Mom was openly crying now, silent tears tracking her makeup. "You lied to me," I said finally, my voice unnaturally calm. "For 8 years, you've been lying to me." Dad nodded, his eyes wet. "Yes. You took my college fund, money that was specifically for my education, my future, and used it for the store without asking me, without telling me." "Yes," he repeated, the word barely audible. "And then, instead of admitting what you'd done, you invented a story about a market crash. Made me believe it was just bad luck." Uncle Robert spoke now, his voice rough. "We convinced ourselves we'd pay it back before you needed it. When we couldn't, we panicked." "Panicked," I echoed, the word bitter on my tongue. "For 8 years. We thought it would be easier for you to accept bad luck than to know we'd failed you so completely," Dad said. And then the lie just continued. Each year, it became harder to tell the truth. "The truth," I repeated, my voice rising. "The truth that you chose the store over my future? That you decided, without consulting me, that your business was more important than Stanford." "Ellie," Mom began, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "Did you know? This whole time, did you know?" She hesitated, just long enough for me to see the answer in her eyes. "Not at first," she whispered. "Not until after you'd started community college. Tom told me then." Another betrayal. My own mother, watching me struggle through exhaustion and disappointment for years, knowing the real reason behind it all. I turned to Aunt Sarah. "Did you know too?" She shook her head vigorously.
No, Ellie. I swear.
"I just found out last month when they started putting this together." She glared at Uncle Robert. "I told them they should have come clean years ago. Why now?" I asked, looking back at Dad and Uncle Robert. "Why tell me after all this time?" Dad gestured toward the check in my lap. "We can finally make it right. The business has recovered. We've saved everything we could for the past 3 years. That check, it's enough for graduate school. Anywhere you want to go. Even Stanford, if that's still your dream." I laughed, a harsh sound that startled everyone. "Make it right? You think money makes this right? This isn't about money, Dad. It's about trust. It's about the fact that you chose the store over me, and then you didn't even have the decency to be honest about it." "We were trying to protect you," Uncle Robert offered. "Protect me?" My voice shook with anger now. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourselves. From my disappointment. From my anger. From having to face what you'd done." I stood up abruptly, the papers and check falling to the floor. My whole body was trembling. 8 years, I said, unable to keep the fury from my voice. 8 years of double shifts and night classes. 8 years of watching Jessica and Michael go to the schools they wanted while I stayed behind. 8 years of believing it was just bad luck, that I wasn't somehow worth fighting for. "That's not true," Dad protested, standing too. "We always believed in you. We always."
No.
I cut him off. "If you'd believed in me, you would have told me the truth. You would have given me the choice. Maybe I would have understood. Maybe I would have said, 'Yes, save the store, I'll find another way.' But you didn't trust me enough to decide. You made the choice for me, and then you lied about it. For years. I don't remember leaving my parents' house. I don't remember the drive back to my apartment. I just remember finding myself sitting on my couch, still in the emerald green Christmas sweater, the envelope clutched in my hands, tears finally streaming down my face. The check they'd written me was for $217,000. $120,000 for the original college fund, plus what they calculated would have been the investment returns over 8 years, plus extra they'd been saving to try to make amends. Enough for Stanford graduate school, with plenty left over. A fortune to someone who had been counting pennies for coffee for years. I felt sick looking at it. Blood money. Guilt money. Too little, too late money. My phone buzzed incessantly.
Mom.
Dad. Jessica. Even Aunt Sarah. I turned it off completely and curled up on the couch, pulling a blanket over my head like I used to do as a child when I was afraid. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was 28 years old, and I just learned that the people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the most fundamental way. They'd stolen my dreams, and then they'd stolen the truth. For hours, I lay there, cycling through emotions. Rage that left me shaking. Grief that hollowed me out. Confusion that made my head pound. And underneath it all, a terrible sense of clarity, as if pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving were finally falling into place. All those years of watching Jessica and Michael go to expensive universities while I worked 2 jobs to afford community college. All those Christmas dinners where achievements were compared. All those times I'd caught Dad and Uncle Robert exchanging guilty glances when my education came up. They'd known. All along. They'd known what they'd done to me. The light outside my windows faded from afternoon to evening. Christmas Day was ending, and with it, the illusion of the family I thought I had. Around midnight, there was a soft knock at my door. I ignored it at first, but it came again, more insistent. "Ellie, I know you're in there." Jessica's voice. "Please let me in."
Just me.
"I promise." I considered staying silent, pretending to be asleep or out. But something in her voice, worry, sincerity, maybe just the fact that she was the only person in the family who hadn't lied to me, made me drag myself to the door. Jessica stood there, holding a plate covered in foil. "Turkey sandwich," she explained, holding it up. "You didn't get dinner." I stepped aside to let her in, not trusting my voice. She put the sandwich on my kitchen counter and turned to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She'd been crying too. "I didn't know," she said immediately. "I swear, Ellie, none of us knew. Not me or Michael or Mom. We never would have," she broke off, shaking her head. "I feel sick about it. How did you find me?" My voice was raspy from crying. "You always come to Maplewood Park when you're upset. Your car was there. I waited until I saw you drive home." She fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, the cashmere one she'd opened that morning, in another lifetime. "Everyone's worried about you. Are they?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "Or are they worried about what I'll do with their secret?" "Both, probably," she admitted. "Dad and Uncle Tom they're a mess. They know they screwed up. Massively. Screwed up." I laughed, a hollow sound. That's one way to put it. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the day heavy between us. Finally, Jessica spoke again. "What are you going to do?" I shook my head. "I don't know. I honestly don't know." She nodded toward the envelope I'd tossed on the coffee table. "Are you going to take the money?" "I don't know that either." I sank onto the couch. It feels tainted, like accepting it would be saying what they did was okay, that I can be bought off. Or, Jessica said carefully, sitting beside me, it could be taking back what was always rightfully yours. Plus interest. I hadn't thought of it that way. Not yet. I'd been too consumed by the betrayal to consider the practical implications of suddenly having access to the money that should have been mine all along. "They want to see you," Jessica continued. "To talk. To try to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said flatly. The letter laid it all out pretty clearly. They chose the store over my future. Then they lied about it for 8 years. "I'm not defending them," Jessica said quickly. "What they did was terrible. Unforgivable, maybe. But I think they've been punishing themselves all these years too. Every time they saw you exhausted from your double shifts. Every graduation announcement from Stanford you still get and hide in your drawer. Yes, Mom told me about those. Every time you had to turn down trips or experiences because you couldn't afford them. I stared at her, surprised by her insight. How do you know about the Stanford newsletters? Mom found one in your old room when she was cleaning. She cried for hours. Jessica reached for my hand. They've been living with this guilt every day, Ellie. It's eating them alive. Good, I said, though the word lacked conviction. They should feel guilty. They do. But Ellie, the guilt is finishing them, but it's not helping you. You're the one who lost Stanford. You're the one who worked those double shifts for years. You're the one who had to watch me and Michael get everything handed to us while you struggled. She squeezed my hand. Don't let their mistake keep defining your life. Don't let it keep hurting you. Her words hit me with unexpected force. Was that what I'd been doing? Letting their betrayal define me? The responsible daughter, the hard worker, the one who smiled through disappointment. The one who never complained about missing out on the opportunities her cousins took for granted. I looked at the envelope again. $217,000. A fortune and a pitiful sum. All at once. Money couldn't buy back the years I'd lost. The experiences I'd missed. The person I might have become at Stanford. But it could, perhaps, buy a future I'd stopped allowing myself to imagine. I need time, I said finally. I can't see them right now. I can't process this with them hovering, waiting for forgiveness I'm not ready to give. Jessica nodded. I understand. And for what it's worth, I think they do too. She stood to leave. Just don't disappear, okay? Let someone know you're all right, even if it's just me. After she left, I sat staring at the envelope, feeling the weight of the choice before me. Not just about the money, but about the future. About forgiveness. About who I wanted to be going forward. The victim of a family betrayal? Or the author of my own story? The envelope sat on my coffee table for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of ignored calls, unanswered texts, and knocks on my door that I pretended not to hear. 3 weeks of calling in sick to work, of staring at walls, of running the same questions through my mind on endless loop. 3 weeks of anger that burned so hot, I thought it might consume me whole. I kept coming back to one thought. They hadn't just stolen Stanford from me. They'd stolen my agency, my right to make my own choice about my future. They decided that the store was more important than my dreams, and they hadn't even given me the dignity of knowing why. On a frigid January morning, I finally unfolded the check again. $217,000. The number hadn't changed, but something in me had. The initial shock had faded, leaving room for clearer thinking. I opened my laptop and, for the first time in years, I navigated to Stanford's website. Not just to stare wistfully at photos of palm trees and sandstone buildings, but to look at their graduate programs. I spent hours researching, taking notes, calculating costs. Then I looked at other schools too, Harvard, Yale, Columbia. Places I'd never let myself consider because they felt so far out of reach. I was qualified. I had my business degree now. My work experience, though not prestigious, showed dedication and work ethic. And now, suddenly, I had the means. The next day, I called Jessica. I need a favor, I said when she answered. Anything, she replied immediately. I need you to pick up some paperwork from my apartment and mail it for me. And I need you not to tell anyone where I've gone. There was a pause. You're leaving? Yes. Another pause. They're going to be devastated. I know. Where will you go? I haven't decided yet, but I need space. Real space, not just ignoring their calls from across town. Jessica sighed. Okay, when are you leaving? Tomorrow. I packed a single suitcase, paid my rent 3 months in advance, and left my key with Mrs. Henderson downstairs. I didn't leave a note for my parents. I wasn't ready for words yet. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal still too raw. Instead, I drove east, no particular destination in mind. Just away. Away from the hardware store that had been deemed more valuable than my future. Away from the family dinners where achievements were compared. away from the sympathy and the guilt and the weight of 8 years of lies. I ended up in Chicago, renting a small studio apartment with a view of Lake Michigan. In February, I applied to business schools, Stanford, yes, but also Chicago, Northwestern Michigan. Programs that would have been impossible before, but were suddenly within reach. The acceptances came in April. All of them. I sat on my tiny balcony, watching the lake shimmer in the spring sunshine, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility.
Choice.
Power over my own destiny. But along with the excitement came a gnawing emptiness. The kind that should have been filled with phone calls to parents, celebrations with family, the sharing of good news. I'd achieved something remarkable, and the people who should have been most proud were strangers to me now. In May, 6 months after I'd left town, I received a package from Jessica. Inside was a journal, Dad's journal, by the looks of his handwriting. The entries dated back 8 years, to just before my Stanford acceptance. I almost threw it away unread. Almost. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and began to read. The journal wasn't a justification or an excuse. It was a chronicle of shame, of regret, of a man who had made an impossible choice between his daughter's future and the family legacy, and who had never forgiven himself for it, who had watched me struggle for years, knowing he was the cause, and had been too cowardly to admit it. Watched Ellie come home from her second shift today, so tired she could barely speak. One entry read, "She's working harder than I ever did at her age." And for what? For a future I stole from her. The store had a record month. I've never felt less like celebrating. There were entries about conversations with Mom, about their fights over telling me the truth, about Uncle Robert's insistence that what was done, that telling me would only hurt me more, about Dad's growing conviction that the lie was worse than the original sin. The final entry was dated Christmas Eve. "Tomorrow we tell her. God help us. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But she deserves the truth and the means to reclaim what we took from her, even if it means losing her forever." I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. Not healing tears. Not forgiving tears. Just tears of recognition, of seeing, finally, the whole picture. 2 days later, I deposited the check. Not because I had forgiven them, not because money could erase what had been done, but because that money had always been mine. My education fund. My future. My choice. I didn't call them. I didn't return to my hometown. Instead, I mailed them a single sheet of paper, my acceptance to Stanford's MBA program, starting that fall. No note. No explanation. Just the proof that I was, at last, reclaiming the dream they had stolen. They reached out, of course. Letters. Emails. Voicemails from Mom, begging to talk. I let them all go unanswered. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed to do this without them. I needed to know who I was without the weight of their expectations, their guilt, their need for absolution. Stanford was everything I dreamed of as a 10-year-old with a poster above my bed. Challenging, inspiring, full of people who pushed me to be better than I thought possible. For the first time in 8 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. On graduation day, I stood alone. No family in the audience. No celebratory dinner planned. Just me, my achievement, and the future I'd fought so hard to claim. That evening, I wrote them a letter, the first communication in 2 years. "I'm not coming home," I wrote. "Not because I haven't forgiven you, but because I've finally learned to forgive myself for all the years I spent believing I wasn't worth fighting for. Thank you for the truth, late as it was, and for giving me back the choice you once took away. I've chosen myself. It's the first time anyone has." I sealed the letter, stamped it, and walked to the mailbox. As I dropped it in, I felt the last of the weight I'd been carrying for a decade finally lift. They would carry their guilt now, and I, at last, would be free.